In recent years, Steven Soderbergh has made it a hobby to fiddle with old movies. He recut Heaven's Gate, he took the sound and color out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he even recut one of his own films, transforming Kafka into Mr. Neff. Before he learned he could just play with the source material, in 2002 he went out and remade an entire movie on his own, updating Andrei Tarkovsky's 1972 classic, Solaris.
But in a way, he did recut it, because Soderbergh's version of Solaris is over an hour shorter.
Yes, which I don't mind. He is the master of economy, which is something we strive to emulate in each episode of the Filmographers podcast. I'm Michael Moreci.
And I'm Keir Graff. We're interested in the big picture. This season, we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, discussing why each one of his films succeeded or failed, looking at it in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time it was released.
We're nearly a third of the way through Soderbergh's career, and it's been a wild ride. Over 13 films, Soderbergh has had many ups, many downs. He's gone from disaster to box office glory to Oscar king, and he's done it while building one of the most eclectic filmographies imaginable. And today, we get to discuss his first foray into sci-fi with his remake of Solaris.
Solaris is a planet that's been discovered, but that seems to have very unusual characteristics. Chris Kelvin is sent to try and recover what is basically an abandoned space mission.
I get there and a lot of people are already dead or missing. All kinds of strange things start happening. People start appearing.
Hey. Of course, he has no idea what he's about to deal with. He has to come here and sort of unpeel the layers and try and figure out what's going on.
I could tell you what's happening, but I don't know if I'd really tell you what's happening.
Okay, Keir. We just heard Soderbergh's and Clooney's loose description of Solaris. What's yours in, as we do in every episode, just one sentence?
For the listeners at home, I'm cracking my knuckles here. You can't see it, but
He is.
When a psychiatrist investigates the seeming space madness among the crew of a station orbiting the mysterious new planet Solaris, he discovers the planet is creating doppelgangers of their deceased loved ones. And when his dead wife appears, he decides he'd rather go down with the ship with her than return to reality.
Your streak continues. That was a tough one. I feel like you always get the tough ones, and I do like Ocean's 11.
Well, I mean, that's tough too, because you got a big ensemble, yeah, they're all difficult, Mike. But yeah, that was basically my description. Oh, you got a big ensemble and, heists. So you're a little better. Oh, God. Well, anyway, thank you. The viewers, listeners cannot see me sweating because they're not viewers, they're listeners. And I hope you appreciated my callback to the classic Ren and Stimpy episode, Space Madness.
Captain's log. I'm tired. So tired. I can't believe my own partner attacked me. Maybe if I occupy his mind with more duties, I can control his space madness.
Yes, I always like a good Ren and Stimpy, a very big part of my youth, for sure. Man, what a time. What you ever think of, I mean, obviously it's not the Ren and Stimpy podcast, but you think about that show existed and you're like, man, how did that happen?
That was John Cristofalusi, genius, absolute genius.
Yeah, I snuck that on the air. So getting back to Solaris, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot of paths we can take, and you really can't talk about it with inevitable discussion comparing it to the original and the source material. And we've done that a little bit before because this is not Soderbergh's first foray into remakes. But we're going to put a pin in Stanislaw Lem's classic novel for now. Let's just get into general reactions. I want to know, Keir, your response to Solaris, to this Solaris, so Soderbergh Solaris.
I have thoughts. Mike, I have mixed feelings about Solaris. As always, I find myself fascinated by Soderbergh's choices and the number of times he tries something new. And yeah, as you say, this is not technically his first remake. The execrable Underneath was a remake of Crisscross, but I think we can agree it's the first remake he's intellectually invested himself in.
Right.
And even though it's surprising to see him bust out spacesuits and special effects, it's still very on brand because it's not a movie about, interstellar dogfights and laser cannons. It's a movie about probing the inner space of the human mind.
Whoa.
A number of directors have tried to make their own 2001, of course. Andrei Tarkovsky, arguably the first with his 1972 Solaris. And I kind of think Robert Zemeckis kind of did in Contact, too, when you think about the end sequence of that movie. Danny Boyle sort of did in Sunshine, and Soderbergh is clearly headed in that direction here. But there's really only one 2001. I find it difficult to summarize my feelings about it, but as we're going to get into, it's not an easy movie to pin down. And before my reaction gets longer than the original Solaris, I guess I just share a few reactions I had as I was watching. One is that even with the eminently reasonable running time of 1 hour and 39 minutes, it's just too slow.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's a pacing thing. It's I don't know, is it proof of relativity? I mean, like a movie that's an hour shorter feels longer somehow. The original is very, very slow, but for some reason it kind of works better. It feels more appropriate to the time. I appreciate Soderbergh's effort to keep this moving, but it doesn't really move. Another problem I had is just that there's insufficient interaction between Clooney and the supporting cast. It's a small supporting cast, including Viola Davis in her third appearance in a Soderbergh film. But I think part of the problem is Clooney himself, who I think has kind of reached the limits of his acting ability. He's convincing, as we'd expect in the memory sequences that show him falling in love with Natasha McElhone. Her character's name is Rhea, because, scrunching up his face and being charming is what George Clooney does. I'm less convinced as the movie asks him to go into dark and confusing places and to physically convey the existential confusion and terror that he is feeling. I think he's fundamentally miscast. And I think that despite this small supporting cast, it doesn't really feel like they're acting. Soderbergh has actually gotten really good at letting actors act and do their thing. But he doesn't do that in Solaris for some reason. It feels like they're acting at each other instead of with each other.
Yeah, I struggled with the performances as well. And it's all people that I really like Jeremy Davies. I forgot he was in it. And when he shows up and his just quirky weirdness, I really love just his yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's appropriate casting because in the original, there's some quirky weirdos on that space station too. I mean,
yeah. And I mean, him and Clooney, I guess, get the best, they bounce off each other a little. Mm-hmm. Viola Davis, who we've talked about, we're fans of, who is just always great in whatever she does, didn't really have anything to do. We kind of got her position, but I never really understood. We never even knew. I mean, I think this is... in a lesser podcast, someone would call this a plot hole, but we never know what is in her room. We don't even know what's going on with her, which is, I don't know that you need to know, but also I feel like it's a missed opportunity to really give us any insight into her character, who she is, anything that she's got going on. I mean, we get that she wants to beat the planet, which is a weird motivation. Yeah. Unique, but it's also that's something you really need a little bit more out of. But yeah, you just don't get much from either one of them.
Yeah, and it doesn't, her choice to finally pilot the station away and his choice to remain should feel more consequential somehow. But I don't know. I didn't feel terribly invested in either of them, unfortunately. No. I do think McElhone is good. I think she's got, I think we're allowed to talk about an actor's physical attributes because that's part of the reason they're cast. I think she kind of looks right for this. She has this kind of uncanny look about her. She's, of course, very beautiful, but she also is striking and can almost look a little alien in the same time. And I think her performance is also very good in terms of somebody who, I think it's better than Clooney's in terms of this person who's kind of recognizing that she's not really a person. I think her terror is more convincing to me than Clooney's.
I agree. Yeah, for sure.
But it still just doesn't feel, I don't know. It should feel like an actorly movie, and it doesn't. And I think some of that just comes down to the fact that it's a very chilly film, which is, of course, appropriate if you're doing something Kubrickian. But after the warmth of Out of Sight, Aaron Brockovich, and Ocean's 11, I want to go back in time, or maybe send a Solaris generated version of myself back there to warn Soderbergh, don't do it.
No, it's interesting that you say that, because and we'll talk about this in the next episode. It's such, I feel like it's there. He's having a little bit of a acting valley, Ocean's 12 suffers from a little bit for a different reason. And I don't want to get into it now, but there's a little bit of, Ocean's 12 suffers from performances as well. And I think Solaris suffers from performances for a variety of reasons for each person involved. I would agree that it's such a weird leap, but I don't know that Soderbergh's the guy for that. I mean, I think he found his place in warmth and character, and he decided, granted, he's a very intellectual guy, but he kind of wanted to pivot and do something different, I think, here. But I don't know. Overall, I am, speaking of the intellectual stuff, speaking of, I'm lukewarm on this remake.
Yeah.
I have seen the original a few times. It's all many hours of it. It's long. We both know Solaris is long, and goddamn, does it feel long.
For me, it's never a single sitting experience, which probably should be, but I tend to break that up.
No, you have to exercise in between, and you have to it's a hefty long movie, but weirdly doesn't, this Solaris feels just as long, as you already said. But I like the original better, and it's a surprise to me, because I think I think anybody listening to the show know, I value economy. It's one of the reasons I love Soderbergh. And, he always manages to be, in most of his films, clear and economical. But in Solaris, he's only one of those two things. He's economical, but he's not clear. And that's what really sinks the movie. Like I said earlier, you inevitably are going to get into the discussion of comparison to the original and comparison to the Lem's book. But I think there's another inevitability, and that's the philosophical part of this film. And that's what trips me up the most about the movie, because I love a good existential odyssey. I love the movies you mentioned, the Sunshines, and hell, I'll even take Ridley Scott's Prometheus, which, by the way, was the name of this ship. And I was like, oh, this movie's doomed. Kidding. I actually like Prometheus a lot. I love Contact, etc. These are movies that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah.
Solaris is clearly in that mold, and it's definitely attempting to take us on that kind of ride. But I would argue the ride in this case, it lacks a clear destination. I walked away from that, and I've seen it a few times, and I just don't know what Soderbergh's Solaris is trying to say. There's a lot of ideas. Don't get me wrong, it's not an intellectually barren journey.
Sure.
But there's too many ideas. There's, and you maybe can add some more, but by my count, there's the questions about the nature of reality, the presence, or lack thereof of a higher power. It dabbles in morality and mortality. You touched on if someone is a human or not, what makes a human a human. There's these very big, broad questions, and you can ask those questions, and you don't need to narratively provide an answer. You can't. These are questions that aren't answerable, and to at least in the existence as we know it. But I think a narrative has to be clear on what the question is. What is the central thing that is being asked by the story, the characters, etc. And I don't think Solaris gives that level of clarity.
I think the key line in the movie, which is, I don't know if it's word for word, but it's more or less taken from the original, is when Gabarian says, quote, "We don't want to explore the cosmos. We want to conquer it, to extend the boundaries of Earth to the cosmos, imposing our ideas, our values. We are only seeking man. We don't want other worlds. We want mirrors," end quote. I read the movie as being about a failure to move on and our willingness to die trapped in memory, rather than truly face messy unknowns. And given what Soderbergh has written about his own struggles with relationships in books like Getting Away with It, I almost feel it's as though he had to go to space before he could make his most personal film. In space, no one can hear your primal scream. But if I'm right, and this is one of his most personal movies, then it's pretty sad and bleak. At the same time, there are clearly other ideas in the film and many other possible interpretations, as you said. And I agree with your point. I mean, you said it so well. He's economical without being clear, because he cuts too much out almost. Yeah. He simplified it almost to the point of confusion. People who haven't seen the first movie will be baffled by the brief appearance of Gabarian's son. And I think it's a real loss that we don't see the other crew members' struggles with the people Solaris has produced from their past, like as you said about Viola Davis.
Yeah, I mean, that actually, I had a question for you, and this is like so listeners, we prepare, we research, we script, we do a lot, and I am patting ourselves on the back, but I had a question I was going to put in, and I didn't because I wanted to get your natural reaction. So this is jumping ahead a little. I had a thought while watching this, and I want to know, I guess it's a theory. I guess we're getting in a theory zone. Was that Gabarian's son, or was that Clooney's son?
Oh, wow. So I just read that as Gabarian's son because of the first movie.
Yes.
But that's, and I guess that brings up the complexity of doing a remake or making a film that's in conversation with another film, is that people who have seen the original are going to have different interpretations from people who haven't. I just made that assumption and moved right on.
It's just that so much hinges on the ending. Like, he takes this boy's hand, and I'm like, that's when it dawned on me. And I was like, I wonder if this is his son.
You might be right.
Like, I don't know.
But again, clarity. I mean, there's the whole thing, like you can watch, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and obviously the ending to that has spawned, late night, weed fueled conversations for decades since that movie came out. What's it all about? What's it mean? That to me has this kind of like impenetrability of like great art, in the way that it's not like Kubrick wasn't clear on what he's trying to say. It was more like, I don't know, it feels almost elemental. He manages to create that feeling that you're being brought into the presence of the divine, I think, which is kind of the art of that film. This doesn't feel the same way. This feels a little more like, wait, what did you mean? Right.
Yeah. It hits you. Yeah, I think primal or elemental, like 2001 hits you in a place that just resonates so deeply, emotionally, intellectually. It's funny, people call it a cold film. I don't find it, cold, where I find Solaris very cold. I think, 2001 is warm with humanity and ideas and hope and possibilities and things like that. And Solaris just feels like, it just has an emotional flatness to it, just to the point of like, if the emotional conclusion, or one of the emotional conclusions, is, Kelvin holding the hand of his child, and the pregnancy and the abortion is what led to him and Rhea's break, which led to her committing suicide, and he finally holds his child's hand. I wish there was a little bit more. I mean, it's hard. And you look at that moment, which is not quite the conclusion, but close.
Yeah.
And you look at that moment and you're like, well, I wish there was more building to it, because if it is, what's his name, Gabarian's son, who gives a shit?
Right, exactly.
And if it is Clooney's son, then I wish there was more that emotionally led to that moment.
Which kind of brings me back to this point that I just wish he would have done more with everybody else's doubles, because in this case, Clooney gets 2, and Jeremy Davies' character gets 1 that's we discover and frozen in the ceiling or whatever.
Something happened.
Yeah, and I think that all could have paid off more if we would have had a little more sense of what everybody else's were. I don't know. That's great. I should, probably I was I have to be honest, this film made me a little drowsy, and like maybe I wasn't as mentally alert and focused as I should have been watching it, and I want to say that I will rewatch it with that in mind, but I'm not dying to rewatch it.
Well, I can assure you, there's no clues. I mean, like I had that on like when I was watching it, the commentary, or it was like I had seen it multiple times, and I don't even really know how strongly I feel about it as a theory, but it was just something that was bouncing around my head. I'm like, maybe that connects the emotional dots, but then realistically, you see the boy on Earth, like as a 2-year-old, and then you see the boy on the spaceship, orbiting Solaris, how he's 7 or 8, something like that.
Yeah.
You glimpse it twice. It's the first thing that Cloney.
Cloney.
Oh man,
Cloney.
That's perfect for Solaris.
It is
George Clooney. Wait a second.
It's like the knockoff second-rate Clooney you get, from another country when you can't afford George Clooney.
Yeah. Pepsi? So anyway, it's not worth, I don't think, a ton of discussion. It was just an errant thought that I was like, maybe this adds something to it, but even if it does, the spine that leads to it doesn't really exist, So anyway, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about remakes. Specifically, why do them?
Welcome to the world of Punches and Popcorn, where we dive into the bone-breaking and kung-fu-kicking world of martial arts cinema. Join us on the path as we explore a new movie every episode, discussing the history, fighting styles, science, and more from a broad range of fight films. Everything from Bruce Lee to Jean-Claude Van Damme to John Wick. There's plenty of room in our temple of couch potato style, so listen in and subscribe to Punches and Popcorn on your favorite podcast app.
All right, so let's talk about remakes. Like I said earlier, comparisons are inevitable. And when it comes to remaking a film, one of the most obvious and salient questions is why? Why do it? Especially when it comes to classics. I remember something our good friend Roger Ebert said in his review of Copland, a movie that I really like. He said he'd rather see movies that could have been great remade and, for lack of a better term, complete the mission, which you can arguably say Soderbergh did with Ocean's 11, which is in sidebar, but that's how Ebert felt about Copland. He felt a missed opportunity, basically. That said, the original Solaris is pretty well thought of, a classic, some may say. So the question I throw to you, Keir, is why touch it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I relate this to cover songs because for a long time I was a songwriter. I performed in bands. I'm kind of a recovering musician. And, there's nothing that irks me more than when somebody takes a song that was perfect to begin with and then covers it and just re-records it with minor changes in their own style.
Leave Last Christmas alone, everyone.
I mean, great cover songs either completely reinterpret an already great song in a bold new way, or help us discover songs that we never really knew existed. Jimi Hendrix's All Along the Watchtower is a model for covering a song, as is Husker Du's 8 Miles High, Devo's Satisfaction, Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You, but I digress. I feel the same way about movies. Obviously, certain movies are remade for every generation, from a commercial reason, because the stories endure and somebody thinks they can make money by bringing it back for a new generation.
It's been 4 years since the last Harry Potter. Keir, it's time. Sorry.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's just a thing. We know about it. Obviously, like the Maltese Falcon had been remade. Can't remember, but I think the Bogart version is like the third version or something.
Really?
Yeah. Like there was a completely forgotten early version. And then I think there was a second. I think his is the third.
Wow.
So, Hollywood's been doing this forever. So I get it. And it's kind of, to a degree, I think that's fine. I mean, your point about Ocean's 11 is perfect because that movie missed the original missed its potential completely. The original is terrible. So sure, take that property, make it a great film. I have zero problem with that. But yeah, it's puzzling when you take a film like Solaris that, is well regarded. I mean, back to the commercial imperative, like it's hard to imagine that James Cameron, whose Lightstorm Entertainment like produced this, looked at the original and thought like, hey, I could probably double the money I made from Titanic, right? That's clearly not what he was thinking, because he has to know. I'm going to give this property to Steven Soderbergh. Like, he has to know. Maybe he needed a tax write-off. He needed to pay less money on the money he made from Titanic. So let's take the commercial aspect out. I don't think that was the thing here. Well, I watched the original Solaris, wishing it had a shorter running time. It's a successful film. It's highly regarded. I believe it's in the anthology, 1001 Movies to See Before You Die. So we're left with, what is Soderbergh thinking, right? Like, I don't really know why he thought he could improve upon it, except, as I said earlier, my best guess is that like he was drawn to the themes and that he thought he could inject something of his own.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's probably a big part of it, was like he has some sort of connection to it and saw something that he could do that was different. I don't think it was like an exercise of, let me do it shorter, that's which people joke about with this movie, but like there has to be something there, I believe, with what we know about Soderbergh, and reinforcing your point, there's probably something personal there. So I think you're absolutely right. And I'll add something more in a moment, but first, let's hear from the man himself, straight from the horse's mouth, Steven Soderbergh. This is a clip from an interview he did with Charlie Rose.
Why have you said, and George just alluded to it, this is perhaps the most ambitious thing you have ever done? You've done a lot of very ambitious films, it seems to me.
Well, I guess for me it was ambitious in a couple of ways. Conceptually, it was ambitious. It was about everything that I'm interested in, all rolled into one movie. And it was an attempt on our part to make a movie like 2001 that provoked that kind of discussion, that kind of controversy, and that risked having a lot of people look at it and go, what does this mean? What is it? I mean, what happens in the film is very clear, right. I think. What it all means is open to several different interpretations, more than any other film I've made. And to do that with the backing of a studio, making a sort of mainstream Hollywood film with a movie star, is not normal these days.
Now, Soderbergh doesn't address why he remade Solaris specifically, but I think there's something there. A known property, classic book, classic film, plus movie star equals studio backing. So I wonder, maybe the question isn't why remake it, but instead is there another way? In an interview he did with Elvis Mitchell, Soderbergh talked about how he wanted Solaris, how he wanted it to play and feel like a European art film that his influence while making it were Godard's Alphaville and Alain René's last year at Marienbad. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I think it's
Marienbad?
Marienbad?
I've been saying it wrong all these years. That's probably right.
I think it is. Well, you guys know what I mean. And that's all well and good to have those influences. And Soderbergh goes to those wells often. But if you go into a studio and talk to producers and say, even if you're Steven Soderbergh, if you say, I want to make this European existential space flick and I need $50 million to do it, that might not go over well. But say, I want to remake a classic movie with George Clooney and...
Mike, I think you answered the question at the heart of Solaris. That said, Godard made Alphaville for probably a couple $100,000. So maybe Soderbergh could have just made Solaris in the style of Schizopolis and risked a lot less money.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder about that too. Like maybe, I mean, he is on a Clooney streak, and which is cool. They have a fruitful and awesome relationship, but Clooney's not cheap. So money was spent to get him. I don't know I mean, I think he could have made Solaris smaller, and we'll talk a little bit about the technical side of things, but like, it's not like the movie looks great to me. So I wonder if there is, if what you said is true, and I would venture to guess it is, that like he saw something personal in it. could he have made it smaller and whittled it down a little bit more? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, now I feel like we're considering the question of like, is he using George Clooney to make personal films?
It's like he's just like basically what his like stand-in, Soderbergh stand-in, which is, you can have worse stand-ins.
You could have a worse Avatar.
Yes, Avatar. That's the great. I can't believe we didn't, all this talk about Cameron and we didn't think of Avatar, except not a giant blue person. So I have a small aside I want to add, which we probably should have brought up in Ocean's 11, but it's still good to bring it up now. At this point, so this is 2002, right? Solaris? I believe so.
Yes, 2002.
2002. So Soderbergh is 2 years into his own production company, Section 8, which he started with
George Clooney.
George Clooney, there he is again. Ocean's 11 was the first Section 8 movie, and in 2002, the year of Solaris, Section 8 produced 4 films that were not directed by Steven Soderbergh, and they were Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, directed by go for it, Keir.
George Clooney. I want to say like Oprah. George Clooney.
Oh, we gotta get that. I wish there's got to be audio. He's got to be a guest.
Yeah.
So, film number 1, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which is a lot of fun. Sam Rockwell.
I love that movie.
Yes, that's a good
ton
movie.
Of fun.
Yeah. Insomnia, an early Chris Nolan movie. Far From Heaven, which is a Todd Haynes film, which is really great.
I mean, not a bad trifecta there. That's pretty good.
Well, 3 for 3. Do you want to talk about the 4th movie? Should we?
Wait, what was the 4th movie?
Keir, this is where we see even artistic giants like Steven Soderbergh can make mistakes. Because the 4th movie, Section 8, produced in 2002, was Welcome to Collinwood, from Anthony and Joe Russo. Purveyors of mediocrity, bad taste, and some of the most god-awful opinions on cinema you will find. I mean, these two ding-dongs credit Soderbergh with having given them their break. And if there's one big error that our man Steven Soderbergh has committed, it's this one.
Well, I guess nobody's perfect.
No, we forgive you. We forgive you, Steven, even though this hurts.
You're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow.
Let's talk for a moment about the Solaris that could have been. Because Soderbergh wasn't the first director who had his sights on remaking it. There was another, and we've mentioned him already a little bit before, James Cameron. James Cameron wanted to make an existential sci-fi movie. Or did he?
Oh, man.
Plot twist.
Oh, man. Yeah, talk about a plot twist. And talk about a film that I would have loved to see.
Oh, my God. For some reason, in the film world, like, Cameron is a divisive director.
Very much so.
I love James Cameron. And I don't it's people, it's like the weird arguments that people say. It's like, Avatar barely has a cultural footprint. It's like, that movie made $1 trillion. Like, your mom saw it. Like, it's like multiple times. Like, I mean, there's nobody who hasn't seen this movie. So, I don't know what they mean by cultural. I think they're just trying to find something to be like, oh, well, nobody really talks about it. Like, in the way that people obsess over, like, superhero movies or Star Wars movies or something like that. So I guess there's not that conversation, but like, do you want those conversations?
He is such a divisive figure. You're totally right. I told a mutual friend of ours, who I won't savage on the pod here, but that Cosmo and I had gone to see the most recent Avatar movie. I just mentioned it conversationally, and I received what I will describe as a withering response. And I was a little surprised because, to me, like, I don't equate an Avatar movie with the artistic achievements that I love and hold most dearly. But it is absolutely an entertainment that I am, sign me up. I will go see them. I will go see them in the theater because that's where they look best. Those are, to me, an important part of the film landscape. I mean, I watch different films for different reasons, and he delivers spectacle like nobody else. Even though I think Titanic is at heart a stinky movie, like, what am I not going to go see a Titanic? It's just, I don't know. Yeah. And beyond his films, I find him kind of a fascinating character.
Yeah. I mean, he's so, talk about a clarity of vision of what he wants to do. Like, this is what James Cameron is doing. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to do it. He's perfecting the technology. His level of commitment is unparalleled to anybody. He will wait 20 years to make a movie just to get it right. I mean, the Avatar, The Way of Water it looks so good. I saw it in the theater multiple times, and every time I saw it, I was like, just staring at the theater, like mouth agape, the screen just being like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this.
I mean, as a writer, I took exception with so much of the writing of that film, and the dialogue is not good, but I agree. I kind of watched it like with mouth agape because it just looked so fantastic.
Yeah.
And to me, like, if you love film, how can you not, there are films that look great and aren't great films in other ways. There are films that look terrible and yet have some sort of spark. I mean, if you love film, you can appreciate different things about different films, and why would you not want to check it out?
No, I mean, it's like the visceral reaction. I mean, that's what the foundation of film is, not actually narrative. The foundation of film is like the guy, pointing the gun at the camera and people ducking, and the train coming at you, and the Nickelodeons where you're sticking your face in and watching the reel go by. That is I'm not saying that that's the only thing it needs to be, but like, that also is cinema. And when you see it done so well compared to other movies that do what he does, like a special effects spectacle so poorly, like, there's nobody in Cameron's league. There's just nobody.
Well, and to bring it back to Soderbergh a little bit, I think interestingly, I would think that most people would assume that those two would have nothing in common. I would imagine they have quite a bit in common because they're both very technically minded. Mm-hmm. Great, there are directors who were never camera operators and who don't understand that stuff. Soderbergh is really a geek about lenses and focal points and all that stuff and film processing. He's really, really knowledgeable. He's not at Cameron's level where he's like inventing cameras and shit like that. But I would imagine that they both really have a healthy respect for each other's knowledge of the technical aspects of filmmaking. And they both really care about how those inform the art of filmmaking.
Yeah. Wow. That's great stuff, Keir. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I agree. I think like while their movies don't cross over, other than Solaris, like, yeah, I think they do share a lot in common. And it's pretty cool like that you can have that same commitment, and the scale is so different between the two of them.
Yeah, and just the idea of them both contemplating the same product. Content. Oh my God, my least favorite words. Product and content. I'm sorry, listeners. I meant project. I really intended to say project. The fact that they were both contemplating the same project, and that Cameron would willingly hand this over to Soderbergh, is mind-blowing. But I know you have more to say about that.
Yeah, let's get back to that because it gets interesting. Oh man, I love this quote. Unfortunately it's from JoeBlow.com. So
information is everywhere.
Information's everywhere, even on JoeBlow.com. But Cameron said, God, I love this. It makes me so fascinated. What I would have done would have been more like The Abyss, where visual set pieces might have gotten in the way of what is a clean line as a relationship film. Soderbergh's not interested in the hardware or the visual effects very much, which is good. Just kind of reinforces our point, but like that first sentence, what I would have done would have been more like The Abyss.
Yeah.
What would that have been? It just sounds so fascinating. And like I said, I'm a big Cameron fan, so I am in for the Solaris special effects spectacle. I don't know what the hell that movie looks like, given that it's rooted in existentialism, which is not something He really does.
Yeah, he does not.
But speaking of how it looks, and Cameron even acknowledges that Soderbergh is not very interested in this. What did you think of the production design? Because I didn't love it. That was one of the things that I really also took me out of the movie. I thought it looked bad. I just don't think it just lacked a unique visual aesthetic. It could have looked better, but where were you? Where'd you fall with that?
I think it didn't bother me as much as it bothered you. I didn't look at it and think that it looked bad, but early on in the film, I was watching it and, you see the spaceship and I was just thinking, oh yeah, it's really hard to do an original spaceship.
True.
And that's not really one. But I think Soderbergh's not interested in that stuff and it shows, but maybe that's a flaw in the film because you're making a science fiction film. People are going to come to it with expectations of a cool looking science fiction film. And I agree. It doesn't really deliver. It's pretty undistinguished. I didn't find it to be bad, but I didn't find it to be memorable or very cool looking. I did like the imagery of the planet, which was more of an art house kind of thing, I think. But, by the standards of a big budget Hollywood SF film, it was definitely lacking, I would say. I mean, seen a hell of a lot cooler, planets.
Right.
The interior of the ship was fairly forgettable.
Yeah.
It's again, I just think it's like not his concern, but maybe he should have made it more his concern or gotten his production designers. I mean, he has some amazing production designers that he works with. Next week we'll talk about Ocean's 12, and I didn't love that movie, but the sets for that are fantastic. There are things that you don't realize are sets that are sets, and they're brilliant sets. So it feels like maybe a missed opportunity that he could have gotten his production designer or worked with a different one who had more of an SF kind of background. I won't start listing SF films that have more compelling interiors and exteriors because we could kind of do that all day. I would just say it's fairly mediocre.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm probably a little tough on it, but it felt like just another piece that was undercooked. And I think these kind of movies, maybe that's the part of it. I would go off on a small side. Something like this, just he has come off of making movies. When we've talked about this in previous episodes, so quickly. Yep. He is just rapid fire pace of making movies, and a movie like Solaris probably requires a little more time in the oven, both on a visual level and an intellectual level. And I mean, judging by how fast this came out on the heels of Full Frontal, I don't know where he found it. I don't know, unless he was in development secretly that we didn't know. I don't know how he could have done that, judging how many projects he had. This didn't have too much time to bake.
That's an excellent point. Because we now live in an era. I mean, this is 22 years ago, but we do now live in an era where the big SF epics, Dune and what have you, like kind of take over directors' schedules for years at a time, and then you see it on the screen, and it's just, I mean, the new Dune, magnificent looking.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great comp. Like, it's just, you can go there, and I don't want to make it seem like the expectation is Dune or bust, but like a little more time probably on both levels, narratively and
another
visually.
6 months maybe.
Yeah. which is like 10 years for Soderbergh.
That's like one movie. That's a whole movie for him.
So in the end, Soderbergh managed to convince Cameron. So Cameron held the rights to Solaris at the time. I think the book and the film, right? Or they might have been tied together. I forget how it works, but basically Cameron was in the driver's seat when it came to Solaris. And Soderbergh convinced him to let him make the movie. And since Cameron was so busy, he had been trying for 5 years to get this thing going. And because he appreciates Soderbergh's ideas, he let him take the wheel, which is interesting to me. I wonder now that you've planted the seed, I wonder if Cameron was starting to not be able to see the financial viability of this a little bit.
I mean, he doesn't make anything unless he's sure it's gonna be a hit.
Yeah, no, he knows. I mean, there's few people, I don't know anybody who probably knows how to manufacture a box office juggernaut. I mean, he's not only done, I mean, it's not just Avatar. I mean, he's done it with different movies, so yeah, I mean, I wonder if there's part of that, but You don't really ever find out, but what we do find out in the film's commentary track, which features Soderbergh in conversation with Cameron. This is, it's definitely worth checking out. It's another Soderbergh conversation. This one was far less antagonistic than previous. We do get their visions for the movie, small versus big. And Cameron admits to not only admiring Soderbergh's vision, but he also gets into how much he enjoys producing because it allows him to see how other directors work, which I thought, I don't know, I just found it so cool. Like, he's sitting there talking. He's like, no, I just wanted to, learn how you do things. And I took this role so I can see how you do things. And they talk about specific scenes where, like in the beginning, there's a shot behind Kelvin, / Clooney. And he does that a lot. Soderbergh does. And Cameron's so fascinated by this. He's like, usually you would go a POV shot or over the shoulder, but he's like, but you'd go behind. So you get a sense of distance and you get a sense of like how he fits into the world and how he's distanced from everything around him. And Cameron is genuinely curious.
I mean, as much as I wish that was a Lem Dobbs style, combat where Cameron was going like, Steven, you didn't put any laser cannons in this. Like, it's so cool. Like, I love that. And I guess that reinforces the notion that I had that, there could be kind of a meeting of minds here. And, Soderbergh, like that's what makes a great director, right? Whoever they are, is somebody who wants to keep learning and wants to learn from their peers. Great directors are always stealing stuff, right? But like, this seems very collegial and fascinating. I just, what a class act Cameron is. I mean, I really love that. And I mean, I can relate because listening to these commentary tracks, I'm just always amazed when he talks about framing shots. I've learned so much about film from Soderbergh doing this podcast. So much, because he is so considered about his choices. And it blows my mind that somebody as accomplished as Cameron could feel the same way.
He is a class act. So everyone stop giving Jim Cameron a hard time. He's doing good stuff.
I can only imagine that this version of the film was different than a version of the film that you might have directed in its sort of minimalist.
Fewer car chases.
Exactly.
Fewer gunfights.
And yet you seemed very supportive of my choices here. Was there any point at which you felt, geez, is he really going to go that small?
I was intrigued. Well, first of all, I love producing because it gives me a chance to see how other directors process the whole idea of putting up something in front of an audience. I mean, I saw it as buying into your process and, the much overused term vision, but you had such a clear-cut idea of what you wanted to do with this film right from the get-go. And, I knew from the first dinner that we had that it was going to be substantially different than what I might do or what another filmmaker might do, but it sounded really intriguing, and I wanted to see that. And I think you were always pretty upfront that you were going to go, minimalist, to use your word, but keep it very close to the characters and to the emotions and to the psychology of it, and let the size be, in a sense, the inner landscape of these people.
Keir, besides you and I, what did other people make of Solaris? How was it received?
The critical response was divided, but leaning positive. The critics who liked it enjoyed its intelligence and ambiguity. They appreciated it being a movie for adults that was designed to make you think. Jeff Andrew of Time Out called it perhaps the most ambiguous and cerebrally sophisticated Hollywood movie in nearly 3 decades. Our man Ebert didn't just give it his usual 3 stars. He gave it 3.5.
Oh, he was feeling spicy that morning.
Yeah. Andrew Saris, somewhat surprisingly, enjoyed it more than the original. And David Edelstein of Slate applauded how personal the movie felt despite its scope. But of course, Rex Reed was once again confused. And Chicago's own Jonathan Rosenbaum was, as always, unimpressed by, well, everyone.
I don't think he likes Soderbergh.
I don't think he does, because, I would have almost thought that if there were a Soderbergh movie he was going to like, it would be this one.
Yes.
But it's all. I also don't think that Rosenbaum could have gotten over the fact that George Clooney was the lead. Like, I think that might almost be the like, I'm not going to write a positive review of a George Clooney movie. I will die first. But yeah, I would have thought like the weighty intellectual themes and the slowness of it might have actually won him over. But enough about him. I can tell you about one more person who didn't like Solaris, the author of the novel, Stanislaw Lem. On the Solaris station, which is his official website, he admitted to not having seen the movie, just so great. Like, but I'm going to take it down anyway. He was pretty pissed that his ideas regarding humanity's encounter with a very real unknown entity were reduced to a romantic relationship. Those ideas apparently drive the book. I feel badly that I haven't read it yet, but quoting Lem here, it's why the book was titled Solaris and not Love in Outer Space, end quote.
Zing, Lem, jeez.
Pow. Everyone's a critic. But then again, nearly all authors profess to hate the filmed versions of their work. It's a writer thing.
Yeah.
My book was better. Critics and authors aside, how did the movie fare with audiences?
Divisive, like the critics. I feel like a little bit more on the negative. Many people, from what I could glean by looking at audience reactions, they responded well to the movie's emotional current, while others found both the ideas and characters flat and the pacing a little too slow. In terms of dollars and cents, like we mentioned earlier, it was made on a $50 million budget, but only grossed $15 million domestically and another $15 million internationally. So it fell, well beneath its production cost. And this surprised me. I'm surprised by this. The movie currently isn't in print in terms of a physical release. It was never released on Blu-ray. So it's safe to say it hasn't had the kind of long tail that would, later recoup where it fell short in the box office.
That is crazy. I mean, I was surprised that some of his smaller earlier films were as hard to find as they were, but I'm shocked to find that there's not a Blu-ray of Solaris, because it just seems like, again, picture of Clooney on the cover, you're going to at least sell enough to make a little cash, right?
Yeah, and it's not even the fact that the DVD isn't really around. I mean, it's 20 years. I mean, I guess 20 years is a while, but not that old, it doesn't feel like.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's time.
People guard your Steven Soderbergh film libraries carefully.
I know. Well, physical media, man.
Physical media.
Though in Solaris's defense, I will say this. It opened on November 27th, which was that coveted Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which is a strange opening day.
Yeah.
And it was against the latest Bond movie. So Die Another Day had opened a few days before. And a little under the radar movie that was picking up holiday steam also was out, and that was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So it had a very tough mountain to climb if it was going to really, elbow its way to the table with just those two movies.
It's a lesson to all of us in any artistic discipline. No matter how hard we work or how good our work is, if you go up against Harry Potter, you're going to hear Avada Kedavra.
Oh, well, I think that's a good place to end. Before we wrap up, I wanted to touch briefly on two evergreen Soderbergh topics that pop up in Solaris. One of them, I know it's the simple one. Do you just want to say it? What happened? What is George Clooney doing in this movie, Keir?
He's a man looking to rectify a past mistake. I was quite simply shocked to find that theme in Soderbergh's work.
It's true. Man, we've learned a lot about Soderbergh.
We have.
But the second's a little deeper. It's all about human disconnection between the two leads' connection. Now, if they're alive or dead on Solaris or Earth, and when that connection happens, who's to say? We don't really know. But that aside, there's a lot of conversation on screens, a lot of indirect conversations between characters when it's more about what they're not saying, or pre-lap dialogue where the words carry from one scene to the next, which is, we see a lot in Soderbergh. Yeah. And that actually kind of works for this movie. I mean, it never doesn't work, but if you're talking about a movie about characters who disconnect and you don't know really, especially in the ending, like I said, that ambiguity, what's going on, the dialogue being a little out of step, it's effective. I think it's good.
I agree. Which, and I hate to belabor this, reinforces my impression of Soderbergh as a man apart, someone who does play well with others, but is, in some deeper way, still struggling to connect.
Good stuff from our man Soderbergh. He's staying consistent, working fast, trying to correct past mistakes. So, as always, if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. You can do through our website and take a moment to give us a good rating or review on your platform of choice. Don't forget also to tell your film-loving friends about us. Follow us also, please, on Instagram at The Filmographers, or on X at FilmographerPod, or on Letterboxd. And like I said, we do have a website, which is filmographerspodcast.com. And you can visit us on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast.
Special thanks to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed our theme, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo. If you have feedback, suggestions, or just want to share a fun Soderbergh fact, email us at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
Next week on the Filmographers Podcast, we follow Soderbergh into a Soderbergh first.
No one's correcting past mistakes?
Actually, I think they do. I'm trying to remember, but but I was thinking of something else. Let's just say Soderbergh's numbers are on the rise. Here, if someone's coming to Chicago, what's one place they should visit?
Well, I would say Calumet Fisheries, but that burned down. You can still see the famous bridge where the Blues Brothers jumped over the Calumet River, though. Maybe the Rat Hole in Roscoe Village, where you can see the outline of a rat that died in the wet cement when they were pouring the sidewalk.
Okay, I take it you're not a fan of the usual tourist stuff. No Navy Pier, Skydeck, Bean, Pizzeria Uno, nothing?
Well, everybody knows about those. Actually, there is one Chicago landmark no visitor should miss.
Which is?
Exile in Bookville, Chicago's most Instagrammable bookstore. The name is a tribute to the classic Liz Phair album, Exile in Guyville. I can't wait until someone names a bookstore after us.
You're right, Keir. Exile is the best. Wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling books, all lovingly curated by owners Javier Ramirez and Kristen Enola Gilbert. Even if you don't know what you're looking for, I guarantee you'll find something to read. Their recommendations are always on point.
Their strong suit may be general and literary fiction, but I particularly love the middle room. That's where you find books about art and music, graphic novels, cooking and cocktails, and the filmographer's personal favorite, film books.
Like the store itself, it's small but lovingly curated. Javier and Kristen were kind enough to let us recommend our favorite film books, so stop by and see.
I wrote a shelf talker for one of my all-time favorites, Kyle Buchanan's Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road. Everyone who worked on that movie is a legitimate hero.
They also stocked one of my favorites, Sam Watson's The Big Goodbye, Chinatown in the Last Years of Hollywood. Exile also has the best small press selection I've ever seen. Weird books, but good books. Oh, and the best in modern horror.
Don't forget the pens and stationery.
Oh, I won't. I actually just got a Miyazaki-themed journal for my kids.
They also have some of the most interesting author events around. From their horror book club and their film club to big-name visiting authors, there's always something cool going on there.
You said it, Keir. Listeners, if you're coming to Chicago, don't leave without visiting Exile in Bookville on the second floor of the beautiful historic fine arts building at 410 South Michigan Avenue. That's exileinbookville.com and at Exile in Bookville on Instagram.
Because there's more to life than movies. There are books, too.
About movies.